Welcome back, I'm Mr. R, and this is the Rondinelli project. In this step, I will demonstrate how to prepare the cast for painting. Let's not waste any time. Here is what you will need to do. After you get your cast out of the mold, one of the first things you want to do is clean up the seams on the belly, on the back, and behind the tail. And the only way to effectively do that is use a Dremel and grind it down. And you have to be careful that you don't remove too much material. But you want to get that seam so it's invisible when you paint it. Now, a neat little trick is once you think you have the seam where you want it is to paint it white, and it'll show you if you still need to do any more grinding or sanding. It takes a little longer than you think. But I work the belly and I work the back, and you have to work into the edge of the fins as they approach the seam. And one of the most difficult parts is in behind the dorsal fin and the anal fin. You have to get that all sanded down so it's nice and smooth on that seam so you can't see it when it's painted. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm doing the edge of the caudal fin, the tail there, just to lead into the center line behind the anal fin in front of the tail. And I just use this to take the majority of material off. Now I'm going to use an emery board. This works really well to smooth out that seam even further. And you need to do this because if you don't, you're always going to see a line on where the A side of the mold and the B side of the mold bring the cast together, and you don't want that line to show. So it takes a little bit of work. You need to take your time and get this right. I use a brush too. I just brush off the dust so you can see. You might think you have a real smooth surface, but if you paint it white, it's going to show you if you need more sanding. So take the time to do this and you'll have a much, much better looking replica when it comes time to paint. There's nothing worse than starting to paint and you have a line and it's like, oh man. Now, I'm leading into the dorsal fin, to the very first spine that is there, and I'm removing that excess fiberglass. Now, if you recall, I told you to give yourself plenty of material above the fin when you are getting ready to cast, and this is the reason why. You need to have that extra material so that you can grind down the dorsal fin to get it looking like it needs to. And I needed to cut that back because that's where the actual dorsal fin starts. So that's what I'm doing there. And you can see the first spine of the dorsal fin. The bottom line is it's not rocket science. You just want to make the seam disappear. And that's all you're doing. And it's just a little bit of elbow grease and time. Now, you might have some areas that you need to actually add material to in order to get things to match up. And we'll talk about that a little later, but there's a product for that. It's called epoxy. It's really good stuff. We're going to turn our attention now to the fins. The fins are delicate and they're tricky, but they look really good once they're all cleaned up. Now, there's a lot of material on the fins yet I haven't cleaned off, but they'll get very transparent once I get done. Once again, this is why you have extra material to trim the fin down. And you want a nice, clean looking fin. Now, I know that fins are ragged looking on some fish, but there's also fish that have absolutely beautiful fins and nice and smooth. So I always try to make my fins look as realistic as possible, but I still try to give a nice smooth edge. And what I'm doing now is I'm looking for cracks, and I have one right here on the dorsal fin. It looks like a piece of hair, but it's actually a crack, and that's a danger area because of vibration. So you kind of have to be really careful with trimming off fiberglass. If you get a lot of vibration, I've had it, crack the fin or snap the fin right off. So what I'm doing is creating the membrane in between the spines themselves. And you have to be careful here too, or you'll break the top of the spine off the spike, which you don't want to do that. And at the end of the dorsal fin on this particular cast, I've got a cracked dorsal fin, and I'm really nervous about that because if I get down around there and the Dremel tool starts to chatter a little bit, it'll break the fin right off. So God hates a coward, so we'll just move right down and trim that down so I can get back in there in order to work on the seam underneath the anal fin and the dorsal fin. It's okay, I use a pair of scissors to trim fins, and the reason I use the light too is to see where all of the rays stop. I'm giving myself a lot of extra material so that I can trim things down to where they need to be. Otherwise the tail will look too short. So always give yourself plenty of material. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to switch to an emery board and smooth out the edge of the fin, just shaping it so that it looks right. And I'll show you an example of a chip. It happens. It ticked me off. Right there I chipped the fin right there. It chattered a little bit and I chipped the fin. So when it happens, you can either leave it or you can smooth it out, and you have to be careful not to remove too much material because it's kind of a pain to rebuild the tail back. I've had to do that before, but that's a whole nother topic. We're not worried about that right now. Right there is another chip, and that really ticked me off. It just seemed like it got worse and worse and worse. And sometimes when that happens, you have no choice. That's when I go to the emery board because apparently there's too much vibration. And sometimes if you run the fin under warm water, you'll soften it up a little bit. I let this sit overnight and the fins got harder and they can become brittle. I just took an emery board and worked on it. There the tail is, and it looks pretty good. What I'm doing now is changing the bit from my grinding tool to a different type of grinding tool. It's just a grinding disc. And they're cutting discs, but these will cut metal, but they work really nice on fiberglass. But these two create a lot of vibration, and you hold your breath here, or if you're a little shaky with your hand. I'm defining the spines. I'm kind of bringing them to a point. And you just have to be ever so careful. You want to be careful not to pry. If you pry in there, it'll chip out part of the fin. I've had that happen. I was working on a walleye dorsal fin. It was a really nice replica, and vibration caught the top of the dorsal fin, and it chipped out a big half moon of the fin, and it ruined it. I had to rebuild that all back and regrind it and sand it, and it was a pain. Now there's the trouble area. You can see that crack. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get in there, and because there's really no fin there, there's a space in there on the actual fish. And when you look with a light, or if your eyes are real good, you can see where the rays and the fin stops, and that's just extra material that has to be removed. I'm just using an emery board, and I'm adding more detail to the fin, smoothing them out, making them look more realistic. But what I'm doing is I'm matching to where I can see the rays ending, because that was what the cast did. It shows me where the fin ends. And if you have a little extra material, then you can grind down into the rays. And I'm being real careful around that crack. I don't want that to break off the back part of the fin. And there the fins are. They're completed pretty well. I'm happy with those. They look pretty good. I can work with that. Now, on this cast, what's left to remove is the mouth, the eyes, and of course the operculum, the gill openings that I flared. What I'm going to do now is show you how to open the mouth. If you recall, I put a bunch of material in the mouth when I put this fish in the bedding. If I wouldn't have done that, all of the fiberglass would have ran in the mouth and I never would have got the cast out of the mold. And there's a little rule of thumb. Any material you add, you have to think in reverse in a negative way, like a negative image. Any extra material you add, when the cast comes out, you're going to be removing that. And the reason I put that in there was so I could see the lips and then know where I had to remove that excess material of bedding that I put in there. And that's what I'm doing now. And I sped this up because it takes a long time to do this, and you're going to see that there's a lot going on here. But you have to be really careful here. Not so much about breaking off anything, although I suppose that could happen, but you don't want to remove too much. You have to look at where your lip lines are. And I'm creating the mouth opening. And I don't overextend the mouth, and you want it to look natural, like they're breathing underwater. That's what I'm doing here. But I also know how I've finally decided what I'm going to do at the end of this, how I'm going to position this fish. So I'm going to kind of save that. That's going to be kind of a surprise. But you can see me working in there, taking that off using an emery board. I have different grinding tools that reach in there. You just have to take your time. Be very careful. Of course, don't cut your hand either. You don't want to drill through your hand. But the mouth is starting to take shape, and you can see the lips now. There's a lot of sculpting that goes on. But it's starting to shape up. Starting to shape up. And I'll keep working on this to get it nice and smooth. And once I repaint the cast with white paint, it'll show me imperfections. So I'm going to move now to the operculum, the gill opening, and this is how I flare the gill a little bit. I don't always flare the gill, but sometimes I do. And we want to put one of the gills in there once we're done for more realism. Generally, the operculum is closed. That flap is closed on the fish until it breathes. It just opens up a little bit. But when they open their mouth and suck things into their mouth, the operculum flares and it pushes unwanted material out through that gill opening. Plus, they move water over their gills to extract the oxygen from the water. So that's why I put the material in the gill flap. And I'm now removing that extra material. And when it's done, there'll be a little bit of a flare on the operculum. Now, I usually create a mold for the gills themselves. And I have to be honest, I forgot to do that. I created a mold for the fins, but I forgot to mold the gills. That's not a big deal because I'm not going to show all the gills. I'm just going to, the first gill you'll see just a little bit, so I can create that and make that believable. I'll show you how to do that. It's not that hard, but it looks good when it's in there. Now, if you were flaring, doing a full flare, you'd have to show all 4 gill plates, but we're not doing that. Notice how I run that line all the way down, and I'm probably going to have to cut more of that material out once I start seeing how the gill plate's going to fit in there, but that'll come a little bit later. I just want to show you how the gills are flared. Now, I haven't cut out the eye openings yet because I don't have the eyes. I had to order some. I didn't have the right size. I paint my own eyes, so setting those eyes in there are important, but we'll get to that. And that's how you clean up your cast, getting ready for the painting process. So I've got a hole, and you can see it right here, and I need to fill that. And this is what you use to fill it. It's called epoxy. It's an AB mix, and it's in equal amounts, and you mix it for about 5 minutes until it's evenly mixed. It cures in 24 hours. It adheres to almost any surface, so you can sculpt it, you can bond it, you can fill it. It won't chip, it won't crack, it won't flake. It's totally sandable and totally paintable. It's just great stuff. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot, it will not shrink. So what you do is you mix this stuff up until it's very well mixed and let it sit for about 5 minutes and then apply it. What I really like about this stuff is in 30 minutes it's sticky and it's the most adhesive. 1 to 2 hours, it's still easy to work with. in 2 to 3 hours, it's setting up with a formidable detail. And then in 24 hours, it's hard cured and waterproof. So that's why this stuff is so great to work with. So you apply it, you put it in there, and add more than you need, and then sand it down. It also accepts water, and when you add a little bit of water to it on your finger, it'll smooth out beautifully, and then it's ready for sanding. The only drawback is it takes 24 hours to dry, so you have to let it set overnight. Now you might be asking where in the heck that hole came from. Well, I did that myself with a screwdriver when I was trying to remove the cast from the mold. Now, as long as I am adding epoxy, I decided to add the anal vent. So I put it where it belongs, and I take the end of a paintbrush and I create the actual anal vent itself, shape it, add a little bit of water, and then let it dry. And then after it's dry, I'll sand that down, smooth that out. And that is epoxy AB mix. It's really good stuff. You're going to want to pick some of that up if you're going to get involved with fish replicas. Now you should have a little better understanding of how I prepare the cast for painting. In step 5, I will show you how I place the eyes. At the time of filming, I didn't have the correct size of eyes for the green sunfish, so I had to order some. This particular species takes a 10 millimeter eye. I'm waiting for those to arrive. It takes a special type of eye since I paint my own. I will also tie up some loose ends and show the results of the final sanding of the cast. There was some minor repair work needed, and I'll show you that as well. So stay tuned. Send me any questions you might have, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm Mr. R, and this is the Rondinelli Project. Until next time, class dismissed.